Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the High Performance HVAC podcast. I am your host, Adam Mufich. I am with National Comfort Institute, and I am joined with a friend of mine, Scott Fielder from Evergreen Telemetry. Scott, I met Scott probably a year and a half ago at NCI's Summit, and we were just chatting outside, standing outside with the rest of the guys, and we spent hours talking. And before I knew it, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was just me and you. We just kept going. So great,
Yeah, that's one of the favorite parts about Summit. Yeah.
yeah, great conversation. We had, we had a chance to catch up a little bit this year at Summit as well. Another late night, right? We hung out with a lot of the NCI guys. I think I was the only one out there from NCI. But a lot of NCI contractors. It's great to get to know everybody.
Yeah, that was one of we call 'em Mike Greeny sessions.
Yeah, he's a trip. He's a great guy. Yep. So Scott, um, people listening to this podcast, if they don't know you, do you want to give yourself a little introduction, like your background in the industry? Who are you? How'd you get involved with NCI? Just tell your
Yeah,
story.
absolutely. I uh, got drawn into the industry all the way back in '99. Army buddy brought me on board, and the way he introduced me to it is like, look, you don't understand or know what I do, but you can learn it. But you know how to train people. I had a background in the military and training. Actually, my last tour was training development at the Special Warfare Center at school at Fort Bragg, which is a pretty cool gig. But he says, you help me build a training program because there's no training in this industry, little to none. And so sucked me in, started in the office and was in the field after 3 months and went way off the deep end and spent 15 years doing test and balance in Texas and had a tremendous good fortune. The company I worked for, um, we did everything from chain restaurants to retail to military facilities to hospitals to a lot of existing nightmares. And I was just exposed to a wide variety of systems and projects that have benefited me, greatly my entire career. Then at one point I attended a NCI class back in 2012. I had Scott Johnson as my instructor, and from there my name got bounced around. And a couple years later, I ended up running their senior commercial tab division for 8 years. That used to be what they called the National Balancing Council. That has since evolved into something else. Um, and spent 8 years there again in training development and training, working with a lot of rock stars over there, such as yourself, David Richardson, Jeff Sturgeon, and Johnny P, and then of course Al Diambola, who initially invited me in over there to work for the late great Rob Falk, God rest his soul. Um, and after 8 years there, and one thing about NCI at the time, we sold instruments. We sold Alnor, Testo, Field Piece, Dwyer, and having been raised on Shortridge and Alnor instruments, but that was a tremendous opportunity in of itself, just to learn the variety. And I started using on the side Evergreen Telemetry instruments for side work, and got to meet Pete Secor, the owner, who then determined he needed a trainer. I didn't quite understand at the time, but now that I've been there 4 years as director of field operations, it's been just an incredible job. To whereas I not only go around and train professionals and use of the instruments, but I'm sort of an ambassador for TAB. Pete allows me to serve on the ASHRAE Test and Balance Technical Committee. Then I present for the Sheet Metal Union, the Fitters Union, operating engineers, etc. Building Commissioning Association. And then also another great part of my job is beta testing new products and being out in the field with the customers, seeing how they're actually using the products, and then taking their ideas for improvements, modifications, or even new products straight back to our engineering team to improve or even invent. A lot of the accessories that we sell were concepts from our customers that we've worked on and then taken back into the field. And we have a dedicated engineering team of 12 people at the moment, and that's all they do. Um, Pete Secor, the owner of Evergreen Telemetry, has a list he calls the 100, 100 products he wants to invent and field, by the time he retires. And I think he's up around 30 right now. And people
Nice.
keep adding to the list too.
Yeah, that's from what I found, that's pretty rare that a company actually takes the recommendations and suggestions from contractors and runs with it and uses their suggestions to improve their products. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a really amazing process to see how quickly sometimes this gets turned around in the R&D. And then also just little quirks that'll hold it up for 3, 6, 9 months. Size of the magnets. And then you got supply chain issues on top of that. Where do we get bigger magnets for a certain price, etc. Just the logistics of realizing these things.
Right. You mentioned Shortridge. So I know Shortridge has a huge name in air balancing. They developed, if I'm
Yeah,
not
Ernie
mistaken.
Shortridge actually invented the flow capture hood back in the late 70s. He invented the airfoil. He invented the hydronic manometer. Just brilliant, visionary guy. And at one point, he had hired Pete to be his director of R&D. Pete owned multiple patents on wireless technology, and Ernie, being the visionary that he was, saw that as the future of the industry, being wireless, and put Pete to work for about 5 years. And then, unfortunately, about 15 years ago, Ernie passed on, and the people that took over the company didn't see the need. They took the "don't broke, don't fix it" approach. That their product has been fantastic since the '80s, and there's no need to change. And it is the earmark on which everybody bases their designs. But Pete simply took his patents, went down the street, and started Evergreen Telemetry, uh, and what I continued what I believe to be Ernie's vision. Um, and definitely has an ear to the customer and a real sense of the industry.
Very cool. So what are some of the things or what are some of the technologies that you mentioned wireless? Like what are you guys doing differently than other manufacturers?
Well, one, most of our products are based on a protocol called Zigbee, which is a very similar to Bluetooth. It's simply more secure. Whereas any Bluetooth can see any other Bluetooth device. The Zigbee protocol, which is often used on the IoT, Internet of Things, for your dishwasher, your microwave, whatever, they have to be specifically programmed to communicate. Which, for example, there's some secure facilities for the government. They won't allow Bluetooth, but they'll allow the Zigbee instead because it's more secure. However, that being said, we have a team dedicated to developing Bluetooth products just because our customers are requesting it. There's multiple reporting software out there. On the tab side, there's Tab Ops and Building Start that a lot of our customers use. And then you have things like Measure Quick, and then some commissioning software that, again, our customers are using and requesting that a Bluetooth interface with the instruments. And we've just launched that, and that's being beta tested as I speak.
Yeah, that's gonna be a game changer. I know, I worked on the Comfort Max team, and if people are not familiar with Comfort Max is we've had a software in the past NCI developed in order to basically calculate the difference between the equipment BTUs and the delivered BTUs, and you run a report. You would use a capture hood to figure out what your delivered airflow is to each room, and I was working on we have an updated version which is available in Measure Quick now. So that was a fun experience and a huge learning curve to try to figure out like what we need to do with software in that. So right now we're very limited on which hoods we could actually have communicate with Measure Quick. And if you have a hood that doesn't communicate, you have to enter all the measurements by hand. So that's going to be a huge deal when if and when you're able to get a device that is able to talk with Measure Quick.
Yeah, and actually, in that regard, we actually just brought on Bobby Kramer, who spent several years working for Building Start to help launch the Bluetooth, and he just joined us this very week, actually. And I'll be bouncing around the country with him over the next several weeks.
Cool. So we're talking right now. We're kind of talking about capture hoods in that, but Evergreen, you guys manufacture a lot more than just capture hoods. Like what are some of the other
Correct. Well, it all
products?
starts with a manometer. Everybody makes the manometer that's used to convert velocity pressure into velocity into CFM. So we call it a PVF module, and then are also used for velocity grid, pitot tube, airfoil, and then the capture hoods themselves. Then we make temperature, humidity, and CO2 sensors, not to mention accessories such as variety of size of skirts. We have a whole um, shop dedicated to that, whether it be a 2x4, 2x6, 4x4, 36-inch round. They can pretty much make anything you want in there, along with the magnetic frames, which is also unique in the industry, to hold it to a metal ceiling grid.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. And actually you have an 8-inch capture hood that has a smaller skirt as well, right? That's not it's smaller
Right, the
than the
smaller base, which
yeah.
is the standard flow hood, whether it be the Evergreen, the Alnor, the Short Ridge, etc., um, can't read effectively below 70 CFM. Even if they state they go down to 25 or 30 CFM, that's really not a reliable number. Simply because there's just so much free area that air is passing through and too little air.
Mhm.
Um, we've modified ours to put in plates to help capture lower flow. But aside from that, your standard flow hood was basically designed for a 2x2 step down diffuser. And anything outside of that, you have to come up with modifications and correction factors in the field in order to read the airflow correctly with the hood. The intention of the hood originally, as Ernie envisioned it, was not to be the be all end all in airflow readings, but more of a proportioning tool. Um, just because there's so many types of diffusers and outlets out there, to come up with one size fits all just is impossible.
Yeah, and I get, when I'm teaching the residential air balancing class, which I haven't done the commercial yet. You know, at some point I'm sure I will be thrown into that, that class and start teaching that, but I would say almost every single class somebody asks, they say, what hood should I buy? And I wanted to kind of toss that at you and is there an easy answer for that?
Oh, certainly, it's Evergreen Telemetry.
Well, which
Yeah,
model, right? You
I,
guys have what, 3 different models, right?
correct. And for residential, I'd actually recommend two: the 3 pound, which can read all the way down to 30 CFM and all the way up to 3,000 CFM, and then the 8-inch, which typically ranges between 150 and 15 CFM NIST traceable, meaning it can be calibrated. A lot of instruments cannot be calibrated, um, which is something you have to pay attention to when you are purchasing instruments, regardless of brand.
Yeah, I always kind of look at it like you really need to understand what you're trying to do. In residential, it's a different game. You know, I bought the hood that I have because actually I was doing a passive house job and there was a lot of low flows. We had, individual ducts for ventilation requirements that had less than 10 CFM per room. So you really need something accurate for that. But what are you going to measure? Are you measuring big, filter grills or central returns that 100% of the airflow is moving through? You have high flows. That type of hood is not going to work out. You need to are you also do balancing commercial jobs, right? So having an understanding of what you're trying to do with the tool will kinda guide you to what you
Yeah,
should purchase.
absolutely. And knowing the limitations of each instrument is critical.
Yep. So
And do having done tech support for years, um, for my previous job for NCI and for here, it seems that the number two things I encounter is either A, they don't have the instrument they should for that particular situation, or B, they're using that instrument incorrectly. A great example that happened quite a bit was thermal anemometer, hot wire. It's a temperature sensitive instrument that determines velocity by how quickly the temperature changes in a heated element, and it will not work in heat. And it seemed every winter I got a call saying, I just put in a 2-ton unit and I'm reading 400 CFM in the back bedroom, and I still get ice in the windows. And I'm like, you're not moving 400 CFM through a 6 inch. They said if the windows are frozen, you're definitely not moving 400 CFM. And then it hits me going, wait, you're in heat and you're using a hot wire. You know, um, it's the right tool for the right job. It's one of the frustrating things about this trade is the variety of instruments we're required to have, and then calibrate them on an annual basis, which is expensive. But that's the trade. I don't care what trade you're in, whether you're a framer, a painter, you have to buy a lot of very expensive, specific instrumentation and equipment, um, or pick up a shovel, you know,
yeah.
or these ditch diggers too. That doesn't require a lot of tools. But when people always complain, like, why do I need 6 instruments, that all read velocity? They all have different applications. And I ask, how many tools do you have in your truck right now to loosen a 5/8 bolt? Do you use them all at any given time, or no? Each one is specific to a situation.
Yeah,
So it's even more true for airflow.
exactly, and it's, another question is, how many hammers do you have on your truck, right? And I guess it depends on what tool is closest to you at the time. Could be considered a hammer, right? You mentioned velocity. Can you talk a little bit about, I've never used, like I have done very little commercial. I've done zero commercial air balancing, and I've never purchased a Velocigrid, right? What is it? Like, what's the benefit and how do you
Velocity
use
grid.
Yep.
Oh, it's basically it takes your total pressure, which is the force of the air, and it takes what they call the lee pressure at the backside, and it converts that into velocity pressure, which converts it into velocity, which you can convert into CFM. But the grid will have multiple pickups that cover a wider area in order to read the velocity. If you ever, you're talking about VAVs the other day, variable air volume boxes, terminal units will have an airflow measuring station in it. Each one of those will have a grid and that inlet that it uses to read flow and calculate flow.
Okay,
So
so
that's in the base of what they call passive flow hoods, meaning it doesn't have a fan in it, like your fan powered hood. So every flow hood will have a grid in it in order to, you know, read the velocity pressure, convert it to velocity, convert it to CFM.
and what type of application would you use something like that?
Oh, the grid itself.
Yep.
Um, that's great when you have wide open spaces and plenum, like say a lot of exhaust intakes for garages, things of that nature. It's manufacturers of kitchen hoods, such as Greenheck and Captive Air. That's their preferred instrument to read airflow through their grease filters you see on the hood. It's a great instrument to read outside air, direct read on the intake of a rooftop. Any wider area that you can't get a flow hood on, basically.
So how does that differ from a tool like an airfoil or a pitot tube?
It works identical to an airfoil. An airfoil has a pickup up front that gets a total flow and then subtracts the what they call the lee pressure on the backside. It gets a delta P and converts it into velocity pressure. A pitot tube is reading your total pressure, which is the force of the air, and then your static pressure, which is the resistance to the air. And your total pressure minus your static pressure equals your velocity pressure. So they work slightly different in that regard.
Okay, cool. You also have you guys make some pretty cool like handheld devices or pressure measurement devices. Um, you have like a long probe that you can close in a door, right?
Oh
Um,
yeah, we call it the around the door probe.
around the door
That
probe.
was that came up during COVID when all of a sudden they needed hundreds or thousands of extra isolation rooms across the country, you know, to for infectious patients. And actually, let me see, I think I had one right here. I do. So it's made out of stainless steel. And those of you familiar, you'll see the Dwyer field piece is just a little hook where this you have your pickup there, and then you could close the door completely. Um, I've a lot of people do commercial restaurants. This is great. You could pick up the exhaust fan at the curb and put the back down and get your static pressure into the fan. Or this is our number one residential seller. If you're trying to get a drop across an A coil on a furnace, instead of playing Russian roulette trying to drill around the coil, you can just remove a screw and place this in there and get your, you know, entering and leaving pressure on the coil.
That's
I have some companies that don't drill holes in units anymore. They just
that's
simply
awesome.
open the panel and put this in.
So
Then we also make a flat under the door probe
okay.
that'll attach to just any standard painter's pole with our manometer, and you can walk down a hallway and just slide it under each door.
Very cool. So you don't have to bend down. I'm used to like throwing a hose under a door and
Yeah, no, especially since the average age in our industry is like 59 right now.
yep, my knees and my back are starting to I'm starting to feel it. Yeah, so that under the door probe is pretty cool. You're using a painter's pole. You could also use the painter's pole, like if you're in a situation where you don't have a metal ceiling grid, right? You could connect a paint.
Correct. All our flow hoods will take whether it's the threaded or the spring loaded release.
Okay, and you could just set up your flow hood and prop it against the drywall ceiling, and
Yep, correct.
very cool, awesome. Yeah, so what I wanted to ask you what as far as your tools go, what do you think that you guys do better at Evergreen versus some of your competitors out there? And I'm not trying to
I
get you
can
to
tell you,
throw.
hands down, it's the way we interact and relate to the customers. And that's dealing with it as a customer myself prior to working there, and then just interacting with our customers and hearing that over and over and over, and then hearing it at AHR or the NABB annual show or the building commissioning show, and where you're actually testing prototypes they developed or had a concept for. You just don't see that anywhere else,
Yep.
and we're pretty proud of that.
I don't know if I should be mentioning this, but I've actually had 2 different contractors, that I've talked to where, they've showed interest in Evergreen hoods, and you guys have actually let them test out a hood before they purchase it.
Yeah, that's been his business model for the past 15 years. They call it the free field trial. We'll physically send you a kit, and then it's something like 95% of the people that get it keep it or keep part of it.
That's all.
Hasn't been snake bit yet.
Ver
So
very cool. I mean, what's a better way to sell a product if you have a quality product than to put it in somebody's hands as they try it out? The proof is in the pudding, right?
yeah, absolutely.
You brought up COVID, how things started changing in COVID. I wanna kinda circle back to COVID again, and, maybe you can go over some of the things that have changed on the commercial side since COVID, and what were the big changes that happened right when we started having the lockdowns and we were trying to open back up schools and that?
Yeah, the big change is ASHRAE had a building readiness committee where they had people across the mechanical trades um, come up how to reopen these buildings. And one of the number one things that was determined and developed was to increase outdoor airflow. And there were multiple independent studies. NATO, not the military, but National Association of Theater Owners, had a Japanese think tank come up with, um, in order to properly ventilate a theater, they wanted 6 to 8 complete air changes per viewing.
Wow.
So all these theaters went and had their outside air reset prior to reopening after COVID. The NFLPA, the NFL Players Association, they refused to go back to work until they had certified tab reports on all of their training facilities showing 4 air changes per hour. The Actors Equity Guild, which is the stage equivalent of the Screen Actors Guild, all your touring productions of Book of Mormon or Hamilton or whatnot, um, every town they go to, each production will not go on stage unless they have a certified tab report showing their outdoor air. NEMIC, which is the National Energy Management Institute, which works directly with SMACNA, the sheet metal union, they've been lobbying around the country for state laws to continually audit school outdoor air. I know university or not university, City of Philadelphia school district was sued by the teachers union during COVID. Over they refused to go back until they had certified tab reports on all 240 schools, and I think they had something like a 78% failure on their outside air. And I know when NCI was working with the ASHRAE 221 standard and did their study of something like 786 systems across the country, that 83% the outside air was found to be non-functional. So those statistics were completely unrelated, but virtually identical, and show the need to have outside air audited. You'd mentioned restaurants previously. Chick-fil-A, for example, during COVID, they audited 60 stores in Atlanta where they're based and another 40 stores in Nashville. and they didn't like what they found. So on a 5-year cycle, they're rebalancing all their stores for the ventilation. Um, Restaurant Facility Management Association, RIFMA, that all chain restaurants belong to, all equipment manufacturers belong to. They have multiple articles on their blog that you can Google. Is your restaurant balanced? Where they recommend having a restaurant checked twice a year for balancing, because most restaurants have a very fragile balance to where the kitchen has to be negative to the dining room, and then the building has to be positive to the outside, or that's a health code violation, sucking dirt into the kitchen through an exterior door. So they recommend it be checked twice a year, because every time filters are changed, belts are adjusted, your grease ducts cleaned, it gets knocked out of whack. And then all of a sudden you get a negative kitchen, you can't keep your pilot lit without enough makeup air. And it drives your utilities. And if you're being infiltrated in summer or winter, put your utilities through the roof in a restaurant.
Yeah, I traveling around and teaching these classes and that I've noticed, like, when we eat out at restaurants that a lot of the different restaurants, when you try to open the front door, it almost feels like the door's locked, right? You can't open it up. Um, what causes that? What's the
Being overly negative.
okay,
And that's a fire code violation. Your door pull isn't supposed to exceed 30 pounds. And it gets up to 50 pounds on these restaurants, to where they will red tag you and shut you down if they can't open the door. And that's simply either the makeup air fails, or they believe it's bringing in too much outside air, and they'll shut it down. And of course, it gives them new problems, because when your building's negative, you're pulling that air in anyway. But as opposed to putting it over a filter and a coil, now it's coming straight in under the door and through every crack in that building.
okay, yeah,
So
and I
you want the outdoor air to be processed through the mechanical equipment and not under the door.
and I imagine, on senior day, probably some of the old ladies trying to open the door at the restaurant, they're like, "What, do these people go out of business or what's happening?" They just can't get the door open,
Yeah,
you know?
actually, I had one in Texas where it was a Genghis grill, Mongolian grill, and they had arbitrarily replaced the exhaust fans. Their exhaust fans fail, and they just put the biggest one on there they could find. And I know that because I had to call the 800 number on the fan, and they said, because it was twice as big, it was moving twice the airflow it was meant to. It was designed for 6,000, it was pulling 12,000, and they were about 55 pounds on the door. And the local fire inspector noticed, just had trying to have lunch one day. And so he red tagged them, and he allowed them to stay open for 1 week. But they had to get this kid who was a local linebacker on the football team to stand out there in June in Texas and open the door for everybody. And he only let him stay open as long as that kid was out there opening the door. And he only gave him 7 days to do it.
Wow. What a job
Yeah.
that is, huh? Stand
And
outside
then
s
fix it. We had they were the older units where you didn't have an economizer, you just had a slide. In order to accommodate the new fan, which the manufacturer, I called the 800 number, and they said that they said they wanted the biggest fans. And they says, well, there's a way to size them. Like, not just give me the biggest fans or I'll call somebody else. And they're like, we'll sell you the biggest fans we got.
Hmm,
And he goes, here's the least amount of air they'll move with the dry package you got. Here's another dry package to take it down. And I guess they sold like 10 of them. And he says, about once a month, some guy like me is calling him, and he has a file ready to email him. You know,
wow.
the thing was spewing grease about 30-foot circle around the fan. It was, pulling it right through the grease filters, right up the duct. And coming out like one of those chocolate fountains, you know?
Of grease, you could sit up on the roof and dip your french fries
Yeah,
in
it
it.
was nasty.
You have a good story talking about grease and exhaust. You ran into a situation that was interesting about capturing grease.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was at a high school, and it was one of the towns that Landman set in, actually. And the high school, instead of having a normal cafeteria, they had like a food court like you would in the mall. And we couldn't get they had a deep fryer because you deep fry everything in Texas, Twinkies, you name it, you know. Um, but the grease is just going over the back of the wall. And I was really confident it was a design, and using the manufacturer's testing method. And so then the engineer has us amp it out. Then he has us put it in the service factor, which you're not supposed to do, but everybody's getting desperate here. And then he wanted a duct traverse of the duct, but you're not supposed to penetrate 18 gauge fire rated duct. So I'm like, you drill the holes, I'll take the readings, but I'm not going to be the one to do it. And then you have to physically weld metal plugs back into it. You put plastic plugs that are going to melt. But so I did, and we're moving 130% of design, no doubt in my mind. And so they finally bring in the fellow that designed the hood, some good old boy out of Lubbock, Texas, and he has us walk him through every bit of how it was placed and sized and installed and tested. And then they looked inside the hood, and there's a tag, and pulls out a tape measure and goes from the lip of the hood to the lip of the deep fryer, and he moves the deep fryer 2 inches, and everything goes right up the duct. And he turns and says, I'm here looking at $500,000 in salary and probably 30 years of trade school and college. And ain't a damn one of you can read a tag or a tape measure, where it tells you exactly the distance it's supposed to be. And, I told the mechanical, I says, man, I am so sorry. I should have known that. I'm embarrassed. He says, well, you're not the one with the Texas A&M ring. And then the engineer walks up after we had done everything you're not supposed to do to a kitchen exhaust and says, well, I suppose we should take it out of the service factor now. Yeah.
That's a great learning experience, to, what do they say? RTFM, read the fantastic manual, right?
Yeah. Well, that wasn't even in the manual. Well, not that particular manual. Actually, Green Heck does have it in a kitchen manual that is actually in the NCI material now
Okay.
for
So
placement. Because if you come out beyond that hood, which is really common when they resell restaurants, and this used to be Chinese, now it's a Cajun grill, or now it's or whatever. Hoods are specifically, or should be specifically, designed for specific equipment. And if that equipment changes, that hood may no longer be able to accommodate evacuating that equipment, especially if it extends out beyond the hood. You could put a fan on there 300 times bigger, it's not going to evacuate if that equipment isn't placed correctly.
yeah. That was reminds me of a story. My brother, he's a pipe fitter in Louisiana, and he works in their fab shop. And they have a sheet metal side of their company as well too. And over one of the welding stations, they installed this big capture hood, and they ducted it outside. And as they started testing it and using it, they noticed it wasn't catching any of the smoke and byproducts of welding and that. What the heck is going on? And they had the contractor, which is part of their company, come back multiple times. We're gonna change the size of the duct. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that. Um, but I'm wondering if it might have been a placement thing, or maybe they're not using the correct capture hood for the application. I know there's definitely design that goes into all this. That
Well, they probably have some sort of dust collection system, and that's the thing about this trade is you're forced to do a lot of reading and research when you come across these things. And last year I had a customer that was having problems with the dust collection. And one thing about them is it's based on the velocity of the material they're trying to evacuate. So the difference between uh, steel shavings and wood shavings, you need to set the fans to two completely different velocities in order to be, if you have too high, it'll pull it through the filter. And if you don't have enough, it'll lay along the duct and won't get captured. And depending on the material you're trying to evacuate, you have to size the fan and determine velocity differently.
That's interesting. So there's all different between commercial and industrial. I mean, there's a lot of other things you need to worry about besides just adjusting dampers, like basically residential, right? Residential, we're setting fan speeds, we're measuring airflow, we're adjusting dampers, we're measuring static pressure, but seems like there's a heck of a lot more you need to really understand and learn for commercial and industrial.
And then it depends on the application. I mean, if you have a restaurant, you need to know about kitchen hoods, makeup air, building pressurization, um, painting booths. They have very specific velocities, horizontal velocities that they test for and look for. Medical has to be checked annually, whether airborne isolation, operating rooms. I had a call last night out of uh, Southern California about operating rooms and maintaining air changes per hour, which is code and has to be checked annually in every state.
So air changes is important in hospital situations and operating rooms. I'm imagining infectious disease areas and that. But what about pressurization and either?
That too, yeah. There's a minimum pressure requirement. It's established by ASHRAE and ASHE, which is the Association of American Society of Healthcare Engineers, and then they publish a standard with ANSI that is adopted then into code that will tell you how many air changes and what your room pressure. And standard room pressure, negative or positive, for medical is 0.01 inches. Although a lot of hospitals, most hospitals have it at 0.015, and I've worked in hospitals where they have it at 0.03. Um, Not the CDC, but another organization recommends 0.05, which is a huge difference in how you have to size that equipment.
Yeah. So why is that important? Why is room pressures? Why do they worry so much about that?
Oh, so you don't have, you have an operating room, you want to keep that positive. If that room turns negative and somebody's cut open, you're sucking dirt in while you have an open wound. Or if you have a bunch of COVID or TB or Ebola patients, you want them in negative airborne isolation infection rooms. And you want to maintain a specific pressure so that you're not blowing Ebola down a hallway. Um, and then the flip side, if you have autoimmune disease or a burn victim, they have to be placed in positive rooms so that you're not sucking dirt or any potential contagions under the door.
Okay. So there's a lot that's involved with commercial and hospitals and that. I know you had your hand in helping to develop the NCI commercial air balancing and residential air balancing training um, when you were with NCI. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, along with everybody else there.
Yeah. So was there? I mean, a lot of this stuff. Is this included in the commercial air balancing training? Where we?
Yeah, and one thing in particular is NCI being a for-profit company. wasn't worried about favoring one vendor over another. When you do things for ASHRAE or the nonprofits, you have to give everybody a fair shake. You can't promote one product over another. But when you're actually partnered with companies like Alnor and Evergreen and Goodman, et cetera, you could use that to your advantage and teach specific methodology to specific equipment. So they put in their manuals how to balance captive air and green heck hoods. They work directly with captive air and green heck to place that material in there. Same with working with Lennox on the economizers. And I didn't have a whole lot to do with that class, but Jeff could tell you the more they work with Honeywell, they work with Jade, work with Belimo. So you're not just learning the principles behind it, you're learning how to work on specific systems and equipment. And of course, you can't get to everybody, but say with kitchen hoods, if you learn how captive air and green heck do it, that's how 90% of the other manufacturers do it as well. And they have the largest market share anyway.
Very cool. Yeah, it's kind of working with manufacturers, you get the information straight from the horse's mouth. So it's a little less just generalized and more detailed based on the equipment that they manufacture.
Right.
Like,
And it was funny, prior to I'd been trained by captive air. And I couldn't tell you how many times somebody on a job says, well, you didn't set it up the way the manufacturer did. Like I set it up exactly the way the manufacturer wanted it. And just to have that confidence when there's issues, knowing you did exactly what the manufacturer told you to do, you could take that off the table as being an issue.
yep.
You know it was done correctly. So now let's move on to what the next issue could be.
Yep. Having that confidence is awesome. And I've been in this situation on the residential side where, I feel like sometimes where you're calling and you talk to tech support, they want to immediately dismiss you like you did something incorrect, right? You made a mistake. And I've had it where, you have an issue with something and they're like, your static pressure is too high. And then I tell them what my static pressure is, and they're like, but your static pressure is too low. And I'm like, which is it? Is it too high or is it too low? You know what I mean? Like, but having the confidence to understand what you should be testing, how you should be testing it, and the data where you could have an intelligent conversation with somebody on the opposite side of the phone, definitely beneficial for sure. So I wanted to ask you, for the guys that are not doing air balancing but are considering it, specifically commercial, how should they get started? What do you recommend?
Number one, buy a few of the manuals. Well, NCI is a strict policy. You don't get the manual unless you attend the class, which is a sort of a neat concept. But I would recommend ASHRAE 111 is their test and balance manual, and the new version just came out last Christmas. For those you didn't know what to get for Christmas, and then the SMACNA technical manual is great. The NEB and then the ABC. Buy a couple of the technical manuals, and then buy the instruments and start using them. Because it's, as mentioned, a lot of my tech support are the instruments not being used correctly. And two instruments in particular, the thermal anemometer or the hot wire and the rotating vane or RVA. At the time, we don't make or sell those, but I'm fond of both instruments in certain applications. But I hear people say all the time, "Oh, they're horrible. They're horrible. Those don't work." And my first question is, how are you using them? If not applied correctly in the correct situation, no, it's not going to work. So that's a critical part is knowing the instrumentation, knowing how to use it. And then a third is you talk about common mistakes professionals make. is what the readings mean. Um, you'll see in a lot of reports, you have your discharge static, and they'll record a negative number, and it's theoretically impossible to have a negative number in your discharge. It's physically possible due to a variety of things, such as fan running backwards, just duct configuration, but it's still incorrect. It's showing you a problem if you read a negative number on your disk supply, or you get a positive number on your suction, which you shouldn't get. But they'll just write them down and turn it in and completely miss there's an issue there. That's really common, is to not know what the readings are telling you.
Do you think mistakes when you have a test and balancing contractor and they make mistakes in the field, do you think most of them are due to lack of knowledge, or do you think it's like a malicious thing because they didn't maybe price the job correctly, or they just are not sure on how to set something up?
That's a good one, and you can usually tell by going through the data. Actually, on the NCI website, under events and AHR, there's a presentation on how to read through tab reports, and it shows you data that's mistaken and data that was intentionally fabricated. And one clue, or nobody makes up bad numbers. If you see one, for example, and it's not super common, but I've seen it enough to where somebody will read out a system and they put their initial readings, and four of those readings will be within design parameters, which is usually plus or minus 10%. And then the other four aren't. Well, they'll go and they'll balance those four drills and not reread the first four, and they'll move those numbers over. So four of the initial are the same, and four, that's physically impossible.
Yeah.
And but that's not making up numbers, that's just pure ignorance. And I've seen that enough that it happens more than it should. Is
Yeah.
one example of where I'm confident that they weren't fabricating the data. And then you get another where all the numbers match design exactly.
Hmm.
That's physically impossible, and that's somebody that just doesn't care. Yeah, they were told they need a report, they're writing down numbers. So, like I said, there's ways to tell what was done, whether it was intentional or whether it was just pure ignorance.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine asked me to look over a commercial test and balance report. They had multiple residential systems, and I was looking at the fan airflow, the total external static pressure, and then the all the delivered airflows. And I got through the third line on the report. I'm like, this is not accurate. He said, "How do you know?" I said, "The static, your total external static is 1.3 on a residential furnace. It's a 5-ton system and you're moving 1,990 CFM through the fan, not possible. Never gonna happen. And then all of your delivered airflows are adding up to 2,000 CFM or 1990, whatever it is." I'm like, "So you have 0 duct leakage?" You know, that guy's a duct sealing ninja. Whoever installed that, they have 0 duct leakage, right? Yeah, interesting things like that where you can catch different things just by knowing what's gonna happen within the system and your measurements and that. So if somebody's getting into commercial air balancing, I know in the NCI classes, after every class that we do, whether it be on the airflow side or the combustion side, one of the things we show is like, what tools do you need to get started? What's the bare minimum? Um, what would you recommend, like as far as tool wise? What would be the bare
Oh, the
minimum?
list in the commercial air balance manual is pretty comprehensive.
Okay.
Make sure you have the flow hood, make sure for especially commercial, you have multiple size skirts. Your 1x4, your 2x4. Um, Make sure you have pitot tube or airfoil, velocity grid, temperature, humidity probes, um, then rotating vane and thermal anemometer or hot wire. If you had to live without any of them, I would say the hot wire would be the least necessary. That's also the one that's misinterpreted the most or misused the most. It's hypersensitive, and it just it lends itself to more human error than the others do. It's not the device itself, and it's fragile. So you have that.
Yeah, I when teaching residential air balancing, I'll tell people if they're learning how to traverse a duct or a register a grill, um, take your reading, average everything out, and figure out what your airflow is, and then go back and do it a second time. Is your measurements even remotely close? And try to repeat, as you're practicing, try to take the same measurement multiple times and try to get readings that are relatively close to each other. So you have repeatable results. Either you're doing it, you're learning how to do it correctly, or you're screwing it up every time in the same way, I guess, right?
Yeah, and actually, the NCI material does a really good job on showing how to do an equal area duct traverse. And the forms will actually auto calculate the one that they provide.
Nice. Very cool. One other thing I wanted to bring up, and I thought this was important, and I don't want to get into like numbers really, but I think with anything else HVAC related, it's easy to price things incorrectly. And if you're not charging enough for what you're doing, you're more inclined to rush through a job and do things incorrectly, right? Do you have
Yeah,
anything you want to say about pricing correctly and how
yeah,
people
absolutely. There's a value to this trade. It's an expensive trade to get into, as far as the instruments and calibration and training and certification. Those are all expensive to maintain. However, you don't have to worry about pricing uh, duct or insulation or equipment. It's a very forgiving trade because you're bidding man hours, for one. And then I hear all over the country all the time, "Oh, you don't understand our market." They always go for the low bid. I heard that in Detroit, Chicago, Miami, Seattle. It's always, "Oh, you don't understand our market." They always go for low bid, and that's 100% not true. Um, I was funny. My previous company, we were high bid on. We were paying for paperless reporting. We had 30 technicians all carrying calibrated equipment, which was incredibly expensive. But we did a lot of government work, and that was absolutely necessary. Um, but the point being is because of that, for the smaller, like say mall finish outs, one unit for grill type, um, 15 years ago, people were going in about $500 for something like that. And we couldn't touch it for less than eight. That was our minimum price for that. But a lot of people got us because we would use the price because we could turn the report around. We could man it. Part of that price was having 30 equipped technicians and paperless reporting to where you could get that report in 24 hours. I had a story where I thought an estimator was selling my bid because I didn't land any work for him. And then his partner in the same company, I got all of his, and all I did was light commercial, mostly mall finish outs. And it caught me that the one guy never used my price. And he says, "I don't know what to tell you. You're always high. You need to lower your price." So I called the guy that used me and I said, "Is that SOB selling my bid to somebody he likes better? He's telling me, why am I always low for you and high for him?" He goes, "Oh, you're always high." What? He goes, Scott, you're $100 to $200 high, but you guys get there that week, and I get a report within a day or two. And if there's a punch list, I hear about it immediately, not 2 weeks later. We're expecting a report and we get a punch list. And you go into what's called liquidated damages to where you got to pay the owner back if you're behind schedule. And then you don't get your certificate of occupancy, you don't get to open. And he says, when he called Tom back and asked about his Christmas bonus, he didn't get his Christmas bonus because that American Eagle he was on went into liquidated damages. Okay. And that wouldn't have happened if he'd have used y'all. So he goes, he lost a 5K bonus over $150 price difference. So it's not always the low bid. For 2 years, I ran our retro commissioning, or we called it our special projects. Basically, every nightmare existing building, they don't call you up, even if it's been occupied for just a few years. They don't call you up for tab because somebody looked on that shelf and said, wow, I'd like a tab report up there. They're calling you because there's a punch list waiting for you. There's problems. And they either didn't have it done right the first time or they tried to get away without doing it. And you can't price it like you would plan spec. My recommendation is you physically walk that job site so you get a better sense. There's an expression in the Army, you don't own it unless you're standing on it. You can drop bombs or shell from a ship all day long, but you don't own that real estate till you got the 82nd standing there. And the same with existing buildings. I don't want to sit in an office and just look at the prints and bid it when you're calling me because you have a problem, and you walk through and you see the door's 50 pounds and you find out they have 120 P tacks that they screwed the outside air shut on all of them, and they have a huge negative. So right there, it's like, before I send a guy here, you got to go open up all that outside air. There's no point in me sending them. So you get a better sense of what you need to charge. And what on paper is a 10-day job is now a 20-day job. And you price it accordingly. And if you're not low bid, good, because I couldn't afford to do it for less than this. And standard bidding, whether, what trade, it's pretty good if you're getting 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 jobs. And I was getting every other. I was at a 50% hit ratio. And it's funny, the people that wouldn't use it would always be upset. Like, you got to be kidding me. You want to charge? Like, that's what it cost. You want me to go through this? Even I had a real simple clubhouse for a golf course that on paper would have been a 5K job. But after doing the walkthrough, seeing all the Frankenstein stuff they had above the ceiling, it's like, yeah, this is an 18K job.
Mm.
And then I love he's like, it only cost us about 7 the first time. And I says, and I'm standing here talking to you now. It's I had NCO tell me once, why do we always find time to do it right the second time? And that's it. It's you charge. There's a value to what we do, and you do not want to be the low bid. And I know plenty of companies, NCI companies, who are never low bid. They are never low bid, and they get tons of work, and they get exclusive. You have an integrity test and balance out of Traverse City. They do 90% medical, and they turn down work all the time for the past 20 years. Um, you have Control Solutions out of Mechanicsburg, PA. They're exclusive to grocery stores all over Pennsylvania and Jersey, and they can. It's unbelievable what they charge, but you want these people. And if you're a grocery store, they're probably some of the best in the state at doing it. When you find companies that are proficient at certain things, for example, my company, we never did clean rooms. We never did, uh, well, we never specialized in fume hoods, but we never bothered doing clean. That's a highly specialized field. that a lot of people who that's all they do. And my approach there was, we all go ahead and do that, and we'll do the restaurants and hospitals nobody wants.
Mhm.
You find your niche.
Very good. Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate you having a conversation with me today. And I want to ask you, do you have any closing thoughts or any other things you wanted to mention before we wrap it up?
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned was getting started. And I'd say number one is buying the manuals. Number two is buying the instruments. And number three is to start using them. I know the NCI material is start your house, start your office. For the senior tab certifications, you have to submit reports in order to be certified. And I had a fellow when I was at NCI, and his previous company owned all his reports. He couldn't submit them. So he had to go out and generate new ones as part of his certification. And he had one he sent me. The first one he sent me, he was having his oil changed. And he went to the shop and says, "Hey, while I'm waiting, and then they were going to replace some other stuff. It's going to take some time." He said, "Do you mind if I get a device out and read out your air conditioning?" He goes, "It's like a free inspection." And they're like, "Sure." And then goes into the one office, finds flex disconnected above the ceiling, tapes that up for him, fixes that, real simple. And all of a sudden, that office is cool for the first time in 8 years.
Wow.
So he sits there and types up a report while they're doing his truck. And then they didn't charge him for it. And he got his report. They were so happy to have that office cool. So while he was getting his oil changed, he generated a report and got a free oil change out of it.
Nice.
There's a lot of opportunity to practice that people don't think of. If you're in a service company, and I do this with a lot of my training guys who are expanding from HVAC service or facility service and adding test and balance. Um, we go to their existing accounts that they check on regularly in service. I got one coming up the week after Thanksgiving. We're going to meet in a restaurant in the morning that they do, and then a office building in the afternoon that are regular accounts of theirs. So there's plenty of ways to generate learning how to do this, especially if you have an existing customer base.
Yep. Practice, 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 right? Um, and that's a good point. Do it at your house, your office, wherever, in a spot, in an area where I always tell people you don't want to look like deer in headlights. You don't want to sell a job before you really understand how to do it. So you don't want to be fumbling around in front of a customer. So practice is king, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But once again, thank you, Scott. I appreciate your time as always. It's great talking to you. For everyone out there, do me a favor if you have not subscribed to the channel, hit the like button. I want to make sure that you are notified if you are interested in this and you want to hear more episodes. If you have any questions or ideas for future shows, shoot us an email and we will see you on the next one.
All right. Thank you for having me, sir.